I think I need some space. My girlfriend said that while standing in our kitchen on a Tuesday night. I nodded and said, okay. 6 weeks later, she was crying in a parking lot asking why I hadn't fought harder for us. The answer was simple. I'd spent almost 2 years fighting for us. I just didn't realize I was fighting alone. My name is Ryan. I'm 32 years old. I work as an operations manager for a distribution company. Nothing glamorous, but I work hard. I pay my bills. I keep my word. And until this relationship ended, I believed patience could solve almost anything. I met Emily 3 years earlier through mutual friends. At first, she was easy to be around. Funny, confident, ambitious. The kind of person who could make a boring evening feel interesting. Within a year, we were living together. Within 2 years, we were discussing future plans, marriage, buying a house, kids someday. At least that's what I thought, looking back. The warning signs arrived much earlier than I admitted. The first one was subtle. Emily hated accountability, not responsibility. Accountability. If something went wrong at work, it was her manager's fault. If she argued with a friend, the friend was unreasonable. If family drama happened, someone else caused it. There was always a reason, always an explanation, always another person responsible. At first, I didn't think much of it. Everyone complains sometimes. The second red flag arrived through her best friend, Qley. Qley had strong opinions about relationships, most of them terrible. According to Qley, boundaries were controlling. Compromise was weakness. Men should constantly prove themselves. Women shouldn't have to explain anything. Every time Emily spent a weekend with Qley, she returned home slightly different, a little more defensive, a little less considerate, a little more convinced that normal relationship expectations were somehow unfair. One Friday night, we were out for dinner with friends. The conversation turned toward relationships. Qley laughed and pointed at me. Ryan would probably tolerate anything. Everyone laughed, including Emily. Then Qley added, seriously, he's too nice. Emily didn't defend me, didn't disagree. She just laughed harder. It was a small moment, but it stuck with me. Because jokes usually reveal what people actually believe. The third red flag appeared 6 months later. Emily started becoming unusually protective of her independence, not in a healthy way, in a defensive way. Simple questions irritated her. What time do you think you'll be home? I don't know. Rough estimate. Why? Questions became problems. Communication became interrogation. Normal conversations somehow became evidence that I was controlling. One evening I asked whether she'd be joining my parents for dinner that weekend. She immediately sighed, the kind of sigh that makes you regret asking. Do I need to account for every hour of my life? I remember staring at her, completely confused. Because I wasn't tracking her movements, I was planning dinner. But somehow the conversation became about my behavior, not hers. That pattern repeated often, months passed, and little moments started piling up. Emily would cancel plans at the last minute, forget commitments, change schedules without telling me, then become irritated when I noticed. Every individual incident seemed minor. Together, they painted a different picture. One where consideration only flowed one direction. The first major conflict happened during a weekend trip we'd planned for months. A cabin rental, 3 days away. No work, no distractions, just us. 2 days before the trip, Emily cancelled. Apparently, Qley had organized a girls' getaway, same weekend, same dates. I was disappointed, but mostly surprised. You already committed to our trip. Emily immediately became defensive. So now I need permission to see my friends. There it was again, permission, a word I never used, a concept I never suggested. Yet somehow it appeared every time she wanted to avoid responsibility. The trip never happened. I lost the deposit. Emily never apologized, at least not directly. Instead, she said, you know how important my friendships are. As if that explained everything. I accepted it, like I always did, because I kept believing things would improve. The next major warning sign arrived through her coworker. A guy named Brandon. I heard about Brandon constantly. Brandon recommended a podcast. Brandon solved a work problem. Brandon said something funny. Brandon thought management was incompetent. Again, none of that bothered me. People talk about coworkers. That's normal. What bothered me was how defensive Emily became whenever his name came up. One evening I jokingly said, "Sounds like Brandon gets mentioned a lot." Her expression changed instantly. "What does that mean?" It was a joke, not a very good one. Conversation over. Again, a few weeks later I came home early from work. Emily was on the phone. The moment she saw me, she ended the call immediately, not unusual, except her reaction afterward. She looked nervous, then irritated, then accused me of startling her. I remember standing there wondering how I'd become the problem for walking into my own apartment. By that point, I knew something felt wrong. Not cheating, not betrayal. Just wrong, like I was constantly being pushed further away while being blamed for noticing. Then came the night everything changed. A Tuesday, ordinary evening, ordinary conversation. At least it started that way. Emily sat across from me at the kitchen table, quiet, distracted, different. Eventually she put her phone down, then took a deep breath. "I think I need some space." I looked at her. "What does that mean?" She stared at the table. "I just need time to figure things out." I nodded slowly, not because I understood, because I wanted to. Then I asked a simple question. "Figure out what?" Emily sighed. Immediately, and the answer she gave made my stomach sink. "Why does everything have to be a discussion?" And for the first time, I started wondering whether the relationship I thought I was protecting had already started slipping away. After Emily told me she needed space, things became strangely unclear. Not because she explained badly, because she barely explained at all. For the next few days, every attempt at a conversation went nowhere. I'd ask a question. She'd answer with another question. I'd try to understand. She'd accuse me of pressuring her. Nothing got resolved. Everything got redirected. 3 days after the conversation, I asked her what space actually meant. A break, separate apartments. Less communication, something else. Emily immediately became frustrated. "Why are you trying to define everything?" I stared at her. "Because we're talking about our relationship." She rolled her eyes, then walked into the bedroom. Conversation over. Again, that became the pattern. Every attempt at clarity somehow became evidence that I was the problem. The following week, Emily started spending more time away from the apartment. At first, it seemed reasonable. More time with friends, long walks, coffee shops, weekend outings. But something felt different, not because she was leaving, because she stopped communicating altogether. One Friday, she left around noon. I texted her around 6. No response. At 10:30, she finally replied. "Out with friends." Nothing else. No details. No explanation. The next morning, I asked how her night was, immediately defensive. "Do I need to submit reports now?" I remember looking at her. Actually looking at her. Trying to understand how a normal question became a personal attack. Again, that realization stayed with me, because the issue wasn't one conversation. It never was. The issue was that consideration had become optional, but only for her. About 2 weeks into this space arrangement, another strange thing happened. Emily started removing things from the apartment, not furniture, personal items, clothes, shoes, small boxes. At first I assumed she was organizing. Then I noticed something. Nothing was coming back. One evening I asked about it. She sighed. Immediately, "Of course she did. I'm just simplifying." "Okay." That answer seemed to surprise her. Normally I would have asked more questions. This time I didn't, because I was getting tired. Really tired. Tired of chasing explanations. Tired of defending basic concerns. Tired of feeling like every conversation required permission. Around the same time, Qley became more involved. Which wasn't surprising. Qley had been encouraging distance for months. One evening, Emily accidentally left her phone on the kitchen counter while showering. I wasn't snooping. The screen simply lit up. A message preview appeared, from Qley. "Just do it already. He'll get over it." That was it, one sentence, no context, but somehow it explained a lot. The next day, Emily announced she'd be staying with friends for a while, not asking, telling. I nodded. Okay. She looked almost disappointed by my reaction. Like she'd expected resistance, an argument, something. Instead, I simply helped carry a few bags to her car. That seemed to bother her more than if I'd fought. The following week was surprisingly peaceful. The apartment felt quieter, less tense, less exhausting. I hadn't realized how much energy I spent managing conflict until the conflict disappeared. Then came the discovery. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just strange. I was having lunch with my friend Marcus when he casually mentioned seeing Emily. How's she doing? I shrugged. No idea. What do you mean? We've barely talked. Marcus looked confused. That's weird. Why? I saw her moving furniture last weekend. My stomach tightened. Furniture? Yeah, he nodded. Into Brandon's apartment building. The room suddenly felt very quiet, not because of Brandon, because of the omission. Again, always the omission. I sat there thinking about everything she'd said. Space, time to think, clarity, perspective. None of those words included moving furniture. None of those words included another apartment. And yet somehow I wasn't surprised. Not really. Because by then, surprises had become difficult. The pattern was too familiar. That evening I didn't call Emily, didn't text, didn't confront. Instead I sat alone in the apartment and thought about the last 2 years, every dismissed concern, every reversed argument, every moment where communication became control, and eventually a difficult truth surfaced. Emily didn't want space. Emily wanted freedom from accountability. Those aren't the same thing. A few days later, she finally came by the apartment, mostly to collect more belongings. The conversation started politely, then became awkward, then uncomfortable. Eventually, I asked one question, just one. Are you living with Brandon? Silence. A long one. Then Emily folded her arms, immediately defensive. There it is, I blinked. What? This is exactly why I needed space. The answer genuinely amazed me, not because she denied it, because she blamed me for asking. Again, always me. I nodded slowly. That's not an answer. She shook her head. I don't owe you every detail of my life. The sentence landed harder than she realized, not because it was cruel, because of what it revealed. After 2 years together, after sharing a home, after planning a future, she genuinely believed transparency was optional. That realization changed something inside me. For months, I'd been trying to save the relationship. Suddenly, I wasn't sure there was anything left to save. The final conversation happened 3 days later. Emily called around 9 at night. She sounded irritated, frustrated, almost angry. Apparently, mutual friends had started asking questions. Apparently, people noticed she was living with Brandon. Apparently, she didn't like explaining it. Then she said the sentence that changed everything. The sentence that finally made me stop chasing. Ryan, if you can't trust me. Maybe we're just not compatible. The old version of me would have argued, explained, defended myself, tried to fix it. Instead, I sat quietly for a moment, then said, okay. The silence that followed lasted nearly 10 seconds. And for the first time since this all started, Emily sounded nervous. When I said, okay, Emily didn't respond immediately. For a few seconds, all I could hear was her breathing on the other end of the phone. Then, that's it, I leaned back on the couch. What else should I say? More silence. Because for the first time in our relationship, I wasn't trying to convince her of anything. Not to stay, not to explain, not to understand me. Nothing. The conversation ended a minute later, and something strange happened afterward. I felt relieved. Not happy, not victorious. Relieved. For months I'd been carrying a relationship that seemed to get heavier every week. Now, for the first time, I put it down. The next morning I woke up without the usual anxiety. No checking my phone. No wondering where Emily was. No replaying conversations. No trying to decode mixed signals. Just quiet. And honestly, that quiet felt better than I expected. A few days later, Emily started texting more often, which was ironic. For weeks she'd wanted distance. Now she seemed uncomfortable with it. The messages started small. How's work? What are you doing this weekend? Did you watch that show we liked? Normal questions, the kind she'd ignored for months. I answered politely, briefly, nothing rude, nothing emotional, just enough. And every short response seemed to frustrate her, because suddenly she was experiencing something familiar, distance, the same distance she'd spent months creating. Only now she didn't like being on the receiving end. About a week later, Karma Wave 1 arrived. Practical consequences. The apartment lease renewal came up. Both names were on it. The landlord needed an answer. Renew or don't. I chose not to renew. Not out of anger, out of logic. Emily wasn't living there anymore. I wasn't going to keep paying for a future that clearly wasn't happening. When she found out, she called immediately. What do you mean you're not renewing? I shrugged even though she couldn't see me. I'm moving. Where? Closer to work. The silence was immediate. Then, you're serious. That seemed to be the theme of the month. Everyone was shocked when I treated words like they mattered. Yeah. I said, I'm serious. For the first time, Emily sounded genuinely scared, not defensive, not annoyed, scared, because until that moment, I don't think she believed anything would actually change. She thought we'd stay in limbo forever. She thought I'd wait, the way I always had. The problem was, I wasn't waiting anymore. 2 weeks later came Karma Wave 2, the social consequences, and I didn't have to create them. Reality handled that by itself. Mutual friends started asking questions, not because I exposed Emily, because people noticed things. People noticed she'd moved in with Brandon. People noticed she'd asked for space and immediately started living somewhere else. People noticed the timeline, and most importantly, people noticed my reaction. I wasn't attacking her, wasn't posting online, wasn't arguing, wasn't defending myself. I simply moved on. That made it very difficult to paint me as the problem. Even Caitlin struggled. Apparently she'd spent months encouraging Emily to prioritize herself, to create distance, to stop compromising, to stop explaining. The issue was that advice sounds great until consequences arrive. Then suddenly nobody wants ownership. One evening Marcus called me. Have you talked to Emily lately? Not much, he hesitated. She's not doing great. I didn't know how to respond. Part of me felt sad. Another part wasn't surprised. Because eventually reality catches up to narratives. And Emily had been telling herself the same story for months, that she needed freedom, that she needed space, that I was the source of her stress. The problem was that after removing me from the equation, the stress remained, because I was never the actual problem. A month later, Karma Wave 3 arrived, the emotional one, and it arrived unexpectedly. I was packing boxes in my new apartment when someone knocked on the door. Emily. For a moment neither of us spoke. She looked tired, not physically, emotionally, like someone carrying something heavy. Eventually she sat down, looked around the apartment, then quietly said, I didn't think you'd actually leave. There it was, the truth, the same truth I'd been sensing for months. I nodded. I know. Her eyes filled with tears almost immediately, not dramatic tears. Not manipulative tears, just honest ones. I thought you were upset. I was. I thought you'd get over it. That hurt, not because she said it, because she believed it. The relationship had become so one-sided that she genuinely expected me to absorb every disappointment forever, without limits, without consequences, without eventually reaching a breaking point. For nearly an hour we talked. More honestly than we had in months, maybe years. Eventually she admitted something important, not about Brandon, not about moving out, about respect. She admitted she'd stopped taking the relationship seriously, not intentionally, gradually. One small decision at a time, one dismissed concern at a time, one ignored feeling at a time, until my patience started looking permanent. And that's when people become careless, when they mistake patience for weakness, understanding for permission, loyalty for obligation. At one point she quietly asked, was Brandon the reason? I shook my head. No, she looked surprised. Then what was? I took a deep breath, then answered honestly. The way you treated me after asking for space. Silence. You didn't ask for space, I continued. You asked for all the benefits of a relationship without any of the responsibility. More silence. You wanted understanding, I said, but you stopped giving any. For a long moment she just sat there, listening, finally listening. Then she nodded, slowly, because deep down, she knew it was true. A few weeks later, we officially ended things. No screaming, no dramatic final fight, no revenge, no public humiliation, just acceptance. The relationship had already ended months earlier. We were simply acknowledging it. The following year became one of the best years of my adult life. Not because something amazing happened, because peace returned. I focused on work, got promoted, spent more time with family, started traveling again, started enjoying my life again. Most importantly, I stopped carrying someone else's emotional responsibilities. That changed everything. Almost a year later, I ran into Emily at a coffee shop. We talked for 10 minutes, maybe 15. The conversation was polite, friendly, even. Before leaving, she said something I'll never forget. I kept thinking the move was what ended us. I smiled, because I'd spent months realizing the exact opposite. No, I said. It wasn't, and it wasn't. Moving in with Brandon didn't end our relationship. Asking for space didn't end our relationship. One argument didn't end our relationship. One conversation didn't end our relationship. The relationship ended because of hundreds of small choices. Hundreds of moments where consideration became optional. Hundreds of times respect was treated like something that would always be there no matter what happened. Asking for space simply revealed the problem. Moving in with another man exposed it. And once I finally saw it clearly, I stopped chasing. That's when everything changed.